Great. Okay, everyone. Well, welcome to our panel, Alumni Careers, Researching and Writing for a Living. I'll be your moderator. My name is Josh Mintenko. I'm Assistant Director, Council on Latin American and Iberian Studies in the Council on European Studies at Yale's Macmillan Center. And I'm delighted to be here today with an illustrious panel of graduates in Russian, East European, and Eurasian studies. And they've all prepared a little 5 to 10 minute biographical career statement. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to, let's start with Dmitry Kenarov.
All right, hello everybody. Can you hear me well? Yeah, excellent.
Yep.
All right. Well, my name is Dmitry Kenarov. I'm a freelance journalist from Bulgaria, originally from Bulgaria. I grew up here, but I ended up studying in the United States, did my BA in the US at Millbury College, and then later continued my MA at Berkeley. And so I spent about 11 years in the United States. Actually, when I went to Millbury, I majored in American literature and Russian literature, and everybody was saying it was absolutely crazy for a Bulgarian to go and major in Russian literature. You know, I grew up. I'm born in '81, and so grew up in a time when right after the changes there was a huge backlash against Russian, as there is today to a certain extent. But so a lot of people in my generation in Bulgaria refused to study Russian because they thought of it as a colonial language, so to speak. And so the generation of my parents speaks fairly good Russian. It was obligatory in schools to study Russian at the time. But my generation, not so much. But I just like to go against the flow generally. So when I went to Millbury, and has a pretty good language program, I decided that I'm going to, I was interested in literature, in American literature specifically, but I decided I'm going to study Russian as well. And so I ended up doing the language program there, going to Moscow, to RGGU, the university there, for a semester. And then, after I graduated, my master's, I decided, I was doing a PhD actually. I dropped out of my PhD because I wasn't interested in doing purely literature, but I ended up doing journalism. And what I did is I left the US and I decided to come back to Bulgaria, and I started covering the region for, not only Bulgaria, but the Balkans and the former Soviet space for various mostly American publications, but not only. And my my Russian skills actually were very handy. I ended up working from Belarus, where I ended up in prison for a while, as a lot of people and a lot of journalists end up there. I was in Crimea during the takeover of Crimea of 2014. I just came back from Ukraine. So the skills, studying Russian were extremely helpful, and not only I would say in Russia, but generally in the region, since it's sort of a post-Soviet region, and a lot of people, even if there is currently a lot of people feel leery of speaking Russian, even Russians themselves in Ukraine sometimes, but it's an extremely useful skill, and for me as a journalist, that was great. Bulgarian is close enough to Russian, but it's not the same language. You cannot speak Bulgarian to people in Russia, Ukraine, or Belarus and be understood. So that was a great, I thought, choice for me personally. Now, in terms of skills as a journalist, I was studying literature. I think the most important thing in journalism is writing skills. Depending on the kind of journalism you do, of course, there's you can do multimedia journalism. That's different, but there's also narration there as well. It's also a skill to be able to put together a video, which is not that different from putting together an article. You have to create a narrative. And so I thought that, the most useful for me skill as a journalist was studying literature, actually, being able to tell a story, and so writing and my language skills. And I think, a lot of people say that they want to go to journalism school, which is fine, of course. There are great skills to be learned there. But I also think that, journalism is really, as all of professions, really you learn it in the field. There is no way you can understand what you're doing unless you get there. And of course, interpersonal skills are very important in that kind of profession. But I think that if you have good writing skills generally, you have good language skills, then I think you're pretty well prepared to do journalism as well. So that's my little presentation, and I'll pass it on to the next participant.
Thanks so much, Dimitar. Next, we'd like to hear from Emma Scally.
Perfect. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Emma Scally, and I currently work as a senior investment associate at Partners Capital, which is an outsourced chief investment office on behalf of ultra high net worth individuals, as well as mid-sized endowments and foundations. At Partners Capital, I work on our client CIO team. So I'm directly advising on multi-asset class portfolios covering really a range of different asset classes. It could be anything from public and private equities to hedge funds, liquid credit, and uncorrelated market strategies. And of course, prior to joining Partners Capital, I was a student at College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts, where I graduated in 2018 with a BA in history and a concentration in Russian and Eastern European studies. Up until about a month and a half ago, I wouldn't say that my major and concentration were directly related to my current role, at least from a content perspective. Though obviously that's changed quite a bit in recent weeks as the Russian invasion of Ukraine has had a really significant impact on markets. However, that's not to say that the skills that I learned in college, specifically in the REEES program, haven't been directly transferable to my current job. Although it's a lot more investment focused, most of the work that we're doing on Partners Capital is very similar to the research process that you would use in an academic setting. In order to find the best investments, you need to do a really thorough research of the entire investable market universe. You need to create an investment thesis, evaluate points that both support and contradict your investment thesis. And then you also have to draw really critical conclusions from the past to present. In addition, in a very client-facing role like the one I'm currently in, it's really critical that you're able to look at all that information, gather it, but also draw an investment thesis out of that you can deliver in a very balanced and concise manner that an external audience who's not as familiar with the investment strategy or subsector is able to easily understand. So I think that's very similar to the process that you would use in both writing and presenting an academic research paper. And I find that it's often a skill that a lot of my colleagues with more traditional finance backgrounds really tend to struggle with. And then in terms of the skills and interests that it takes to be successful in a role like mine at Partners Capital, I think it really just comes down to a general interest in capital markets, a willingness to work really hard, and I think really critically do the research, do the problem solving that is really important to finding the best investments within the broad range of the global capital markets. I really didn't come into the role with any strong math or financial background. I took one math class, which was the math of chaos, and I took one accounting course. So I didn't really have any of the technical skills. But that being said, I really feel like I was well equipped to be successful in the role with a lot of those really critical communication, both written and verbal, and research skills that I learned at Holy Cross.
Thanks so much, Emma. Next, we'll hear from Kelly Rivera.
Hello, thank you for having me today. My name is Kelly Rivera. I currently am senior counsel for Columbia Care. It's a publicly traded cannabis company based out of US, but has international reach. But my, kind of like Emma, my current role obviously is a little bit more non-traditional, coming from a Russian international affairs dual major at the University of New Hampshire, and then going to law school and also concentrating in international law then. But a little bit about where I got there and kind of how I decided to major in Russian and what I did with Russian. When I was 18, I decided I wanted to do like a gap year between high school and college. And I just really wanted to go somewhere that I'd never been before. And I just have always kind of thrived out of my comfort zone. So I was like, I want to go somewhere that, traditionally an 18-year-old American girl wouldn't go by herself. So I was like, where can I go that I've never been? And then I found a program where they were able to place me in Slovakia. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll go. I had no experience with Russian and no experience in Eastern European languages or cultures or anything. And I kind of just went, and it was like a survival experience in a way. There they go to high school until they're 19 years old. So through the program, I attended public high school in Slovakia for a year, but my grades really didn't matter since I had already graduated and I was already accepted into the University of New Hampshire. I just had deferred it for a year. So I really just immersed myself in the Slovak culture and language and really just like fell in love with just how beautiful the culture is and how rich it is. And that's really what made me want to major in Russian once I came back at the university and studied at University of New Hampshire. And then actually the Arab Spring was my sophomore year of college. And I had already been interested in international affairs. Some of those were prerequisites for a Russian major. And then the Arab Spring spurred me to actually do a major in international affairs with Russian, because it was like, I was so interested in it, and it did relate to Russian as well. So then through that, really, I just knew I wanted to go back to Eastern Europe. I wanted to spend like a lot of time there. So in my junior year, I applied for the Gilman Scholarship, which is through the State Department. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, but if you aren't, it's essentially kind of like a feeder program for Fulbright. So I went to my whole junior year, I was in St. Petersburg through the Gilman Scholarship Program. It was kind of like an intern through the State Department, but you also study and then you have like a local internship. So it was really helpful to be able to go through that because one, the State Department essentially funded my, study abroad experience. So it was like economical for me, but it also allowed me to intern with the St. Petersburg local government as a translator. So I really had like an immersive experience, and it was, to this day, I think it was an incredibly beneficial experience because I was able to work with local Russians and see how they do things and like their business practices, and then also translate and see how people in Russia, thank you for sharing that link, people in Russia would translate to English, and then me coming in as a native speaker, how things would differ and making it more colloquial. So some of the things I would translate were, tourism things focused at American tourists. So I'd have to go in, and make it sound more of a native speaker. So it was interesting to be on the back end of that as well, to make it more like colloquial sounding. And that was really helpful. And then also just being exposed to what the State Department does and what their presence is abroad. Obviously, I have no idea what's going on right now with the State Department there. But when I was there, it was a really interesting experience. And I'd recommend anyone that, wants to go and, maybe get more involved or see what goes on with the, federal government. That was a really good experience. Granted, I don't work for the federal government anymore, but it was a really interesting experience. And it was like really detrimental to who I am today, I think, doing that, living in Russia for that year. And then when I came back, I wrote my thesis, and it's actually really relevant today. It was called The Realities or Ramifications of Democracy Under Putin. It's almost comical that with the present, culture and climate. But like Emma said, I haven't really used Russian a lot in my professional life, the Russian language and the culture. I've used a lot of the skills, but in the past month and a half, I certainly have been using it a lot professionally and personally. So then just, I mean, with the Russian experience, but also since I wrote this like thesis, it was like a 50-page paper on Putin and his background and everything. So I feel like I have a better understanding than anyone that is asking me these questions, because I'm usually asking the questions if I don't know the answer or something. And then after that, I decided I wanted to go to law school. And then I really focused a lot on international law as well, because I was really addicted to it. And I just really loved seeing how different, sovereign locations really interact with each other, and how, they play off if they, get, when new laws are being adopted, what they do if it's based on like, adjacent countries, adjacent states, whatever it is, just to see like, how they adopt things based on each other. I thought that was interesting. And then once I graduated law school, I just, started working in the US, and I've come circumstantially to my role now as senior counsel. So I think everything I really have gone through with Russian and Eastern European languages and studies and travel has really benefited like who I am today, and really got me to where I am in my role, like so young in my career as well. Because a lot of what I do as an attorney now is like translating legalese, which is legal text, into the layman's terms, or so that like the general public can understand what these comprehensive regulations and rules and acts really say. So I'm not sure how much people know about like the US cannabis industry, but it is federally illegal still. There's a prohibition, so it's absolutely illegal at the federal level. But there was an act that allowed states to have legal markets. So the company that I work for operates in those state legal markets. It's a fully legal company, just to disclose it, state approved and everything. So what I do though, since it's federally illegal, each state market's individual. So what I did, like learning international law and like, Russian, and see how things have been interpreted, and, how countries have developed, I kind of practice that domestically, really, because with every state having like completely sovereign jurisdiction over their cannabis industry, it really is like different countries. There's no federal oversight at all. So each state has their completely independent rules and regulations when it comes to the industry. So I'm kind of at the forefront of like working with the states and the legislature to see rules and regulations in other markets and see how we can implement it in their market. So a lot of what I do is, see what goes on in other ones. I research to see what the best practices are, and then I'll write them down, research further, and then present my findings so that we can hopefully adopt them in other markets. Or when I say markets, I mean other states, since every market is specific. And then we, the industry begins there. So even though I'm not really using Russian specifically, the skills I learned with the international relations, their translation skills, and really just people skills, I really feel has helped me to be where I am today. So I know I spoke really a long time, because my like past 10 years has been kind of it's really non-traditional. So I'll stop here, and then I can answer any questions at the end.
Thanks so much, Kelly. It's fascinating. Last speaker is Ostap Kin, and then we'll go to moderated Q&A. Ostap?
Thanks. Thank you for your invitation. So my name is Ostap Kin, and I work as an archivist, librarian, and research center coordinator at the Zimmerle Art Museum at Rutgers. Much of my talk will be related to things Ukrainian, and as you know, Ukraine is a country whose military forces are actively fighting against Russian invaders now. So, but I would like to begin by saying that I am originally from the city of Lviv in Ukraine, a city that is located very close to the Ukrainian-Polish border. There in that city, I completed my degree in English literature. And after switching continents and ending up in New York, and instead of pursuing my interests in English and American literature in a place which seemed very suitable and reasonable for doing that, I actually switched to things Ukrainian. So when I was in Ukraine, I was interested in things American and English. When I ended up in the US, I started doing research on things Ukrainian, and as it often happens, quite accidentally, I was offered a position as an assistant archivist at a Ukrainian American research institution. And concurrently with that, I began working on my master's degree in library and information science. So when I was working at that research institution, most, if not all of their collections documented and covered the life and activity of Ukrainian intellectual community here in the US or broader in North America. And it was an interesting experience because thanks to working with those archival collections pertaining to the Ukrainian diaspora in the US, I was able to discover a very intriguing and unknown intellectual world and different kinds of milieus of scholars, writers, poets, artists, and I was able to find out more about that. And actually, it was thanks to that experience when I began, I became interested in discovering how the city of New York is depicted in different literatures, and particularly how it is depicted in Ukrainian literature, because we often see quite a good number of anthologies about New York City, which mostly include American poets, but also they include poets whose work was in other languages and they are presented in translation. So I decided to delve into that world and see how Ukrainian authors dealt with the city, and it resulted in this anthology. I don't know if you see it, you probably don't see it. It's called New York Elegies, Ukrainian Poems on the City. And it's an anthology of poems written between early 1920 and mid 2015. So almost a century of works depicting New York. And it was fascinating to see, to present to readers the opportunity to how this city was viewed through various poetic and stylistic lenses, and how poets connected themselves with a very powerful myth of the city of New York. And this myth of urbanity, modernity, and vitality. And also, New York is interesting because it's a hub. You know, it's a city of exiles. It's a city of outsiders. It's a city of refugees, and whoever comes to the city has their very interesting takes. And I think that this helps. This helps to place. Actually, it helps to expand the picture of this city. And sometime in 2020, when we all actually were in the epicenter of the global pandemic, and we all were working from home, I thought it would be a good time to get back to school, something I was really thinking about for a while. And the area I really wanted to investigate was digital humanities. And I enrolled into the MA program in digital humanities at the Graduate Center at CUNY in New York. And this program, I'm about to be done with it. And this program helped to sort of find the ways to combine practical skills with knowledge and how to work on projects related to digital humanities. And when we think about digital humanities, some of the areas to think about are digital textuality, data visualization, and mapping, and digital pedagogy. But my main interest was actually digital textuality. I conduct research in Ukrainian literature, and I write about Ukrainian literature. And actually, the project I am working on now is a digital scholarly edition of a translation of a long poem from Ukrainian into English. And thanks to various digital tools and sources, I am able to present what I call two variants of the text. So the very original translation and then the edited version. So I think I'll stop at this point. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Ostap. That's fascinating. So for those who haven't entered, who just entered during the presentations, now we're going to transition into the Q&A portion of the talk or the panel. So the way we're going to run this is that those of you who want to ask your questions directly can just raise your hand, and I'll call on you, and then you can ask your question. Those who would prefer to stay silent, that's great too. Just put your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them, maybe not as quickly, but we will get to them. So to start things off, I have a question from our moderator in absentia, Ian Macmillan, which I'm going to read for the panelists. So, anyone who's interested in responding to it can jump in as soon as I'm finished asking. So, could one learn the writing and research skills one needs for your job as in an undergraduate or master's program? Or did you have to adapt or augment your education significantly after finishing your degree?
I can speak to that, I guess, first, that I absolutely learned all the skills that I use, like the research, writing, essentially translation, I think culture. I've learned a lot of things that I directly use in my role now. I mean, in my current role within the cannabis industry, you learn a lot on as it goes, because the industry is still developing. So you can't really prepare for this actual subject matter. It's more learning the skills so that once you're like new subjects thrown at you, you know how to handle it. And I think that like translation skills that you learn, or just like in Russian affairs and how like international affairs really work, I think it really helps apply those skills that you learn through those into my current role here. So I don't think that you need any really additional skills in order to succeed in this silo.
Yeah, I would absolutely second that. I think it's really critical in the business world to be able, I think I was mentioning this before, to be able to take all that information that you have in front of you, that you have access to, and to be able to narrow it down into a really concise answer first thesis that you have, especially if you're giving a presentation to a client. I think the only thing that is slightly different, at least in my role, is that the business writing element is a little bit different than academic writing. It's a little bit more concise, shorter, a little bit less elegant, I should say. But I think that's something that is very easily learned, after you graduate and enter the corporate world. But I think in general, a lot of those verbal and communication skills that you learn in academia are really translatable to the corporate world.
Yeah, and it really helps differentiate yourself when you're applying for roles too. I think Emma can probably agree with that too, that having this on your resume, it really is a conversation starter when you get to interviews. So I do think that even if you aren't going to use the Russian language professionally, it really does benefit you in the corporate world as well, because you get the interviews because people want to speak to you and see what your reason was for this and how you came about, getting those degrees.
Ostap or Dimitar, do you want to intervene in that, or ready for the next one?
I can just quickly jump in. I mean, the research part is pretty much the same in journalism as in academia. That's the way you approach a text or a topic. You just read as much as possible. Actually, in the sort of pre-digital age or the early digital age, it was much easier to do research than now, I'd say, just because the amount of information is overwhelming. And in terms of the writing, I think it's not rocket science to do journalism. It helps when you're doing literature that you can give it a special twist. I think that's what editors often look for. That the language is not bland. That actually you can express yourself well and creatively. And now, can writing be learned? That's like the big question of literature, creative writing. I think it just helps to read a whole a huge amount of books. That's what helps the most. I mean, creative writing classes and journalism classes, they help, but they're you just have to read and read and read. That's the main thing. And just to say, so I had absolutely no background in journalism, and even my first article, I do mostly narrative journalism, so long form narrative pieces for magazines, which are close to the closest you can come to literature, really. And my first assignment, when I got my first assignment, which was actually going into Serbia after the death of Milosevic, I had no idea how to do that kind of stuff. And the editor sent me a bunch of articles that I had published, and I just, as a good Bulgarian, I reversed engineered them, and I decided, looked at like, what's the first paragraph doing, what's the second paragraph doing, how's the historical background coming in, and so on and so forth. And basically, you just take a couple of notes on the structure of the different pieces, and that's what you imitate, or you try to improve on that. I mean, Bulgarians were, reverse engineering a lot of IBM and Apple computers in the 1980s and trying to improve on them. So I decided I'm going to use the same kind of skill set for that. So yeah, that's a little comment I had.
I'll just add really briefly that any bachelor's or master's program really helps one to build a really strong spine, this really strong theoretical background, and you have this necessary research skills to approach questions you are into or you have to deal with. But every new topic is a new topic, and you have to be creative in a ways how to approach it, because one thing is you are dealing with the topic of literary representation of New York City, and the other thing, if you are conducting research on, let's say, 19th century, something like that. So approaches might be different, and these optics lenses you are using could be different. But I will also add that actually, the field of digital humanities is the one that really changes really fast, and something that was brand new, let's say 2 years ago, some digital tools or software, by now might be already outdated. So there are some fields which are changing really fast, and just might be worth keeping it in mind.
All right, thank you. I actually received a question, so I'm going to read it. What are the panelists' opinions on the ways Russian, Eastern Slavic studies, may have to change in relation to what's currently happening in Ukraine. And I mean, if you want to take that in, also perhaps and talk about it in relation to your careers in some way, I don't know if you can make that connection. That might be interesting given the theme of the panel.
I don't know if I should go first again, but I can contribute. I don't know if Emma, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one. So yeah, up until about a month and a half ago, I never really drew any content connection from my Russian and Eastern European studies concentration in college to my current role. But obviously the situation between Russia and Ukraine is having very tremendous impact on financial markets. There was, very quick reaction from investors who were getting very nervous about the situation, not only between Russia and Ukraine, but Russia and China, which remains a pretty critical threat to those of us in the West here. And then also just in terms of like an economic perspective, Russia is a key supplier of energy to Europe in particular. I think around 40% of Europe's supply and energy is from Russia. So I think it's always been the case that geopolitical situations have had a tremendous impact on financial markets, which some people also think is just Wall Street getting rich and rich people getting rich, but it does actually impact so many people in terms of individual investors and their retirement accounts, pension funds, endowments, and foundations. Like Yale is a pioneering investment endowment. We model a lot of our work off of David Swenson, who was the CIO there for a very long time. And so it's really critical to be able to understand the connections of what's been going on from a geopolitical perspective, just because it impacts financial markets and those impact so many people. And obviously the events that are going on between Russia and Ukraine are very deep rooted in history. We all probably know this by now, but Russia's obviously been trying to define its borders for a really long time. And so, to some extent, the situation in Ukraine is really surprising, from a reaction standpoint and all the economic sanctions that have been going on in Russia today. But, to some extent as well, it's also not surprising given, the long history of Russia defining its borders, declaring Ukraine as its proper territory. And so I think, to the overall point of the question, which I'm having a very long-winded answer to, is just that it's really critical to understand the geopolitical context behind things. It's really important to understand history and how that's playing into current events. It helps us certainly understand the context behind Putin's actions and understanding exactly what are the forces that are motivating him, whether he'll be taking an off-ramp from the situation, and understanding how forces like China and Russia are working together and creating an alliance. So I think it just becomes super critical with REEES programs today to make sure that we're taking the history aspect, which is really important, and we're drawing those critical connections to the present. And it has implications for everyone.
Kelly, did you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, Emma pretty much said what I was going to say. That I don't think that REEES students need to think about changing, what their studies are. I think it's, again, just like emphasizing understanding the geopolitical environment there, because it does have like detrimental impacts on our day-to-day, which you wouldn't think. But like for my company, we have thousands of employees, and I'm the only one like in the executive area that has Russian experience. So I've really been tapped into the last 6 weeks. One of our competitors, actually one of their founders, has ties to the Kremlin, and their stock prices dropped like 50% when the sanctions started being issued. He was never sanctioned. There's no issue. Like once they made a public statement, the stock prices like normalized again. But people are coming to be like, what's going on? Check how our stockholders are, like your shareholders are, see if we have any Russian ties, things like that. Like you wouldn't think actually tie to our day-to-day or like American businesses, but it does too, especially with public companies. So they came to me kind of just to understand like what's going on here, what's like the background, is this going to impact us, especially as we expand to Europe, which the company's currently doing. So just understanding like the background there and the history and why like Russia would have invaded and like, you know, the historical context behind it, like Emma said, is really important day to day. I mean, obviously the Russian language is important, but if you're not going to be using the Russian language in like, or if you don't plan to be a translator or work for the government or something, that you're going to use it regularly, I think that one of the most important parts of those studies is the politics and culture behind them.
I'll just say a few quick things about Russian and the language, and you know, sort of my thoughts about the whole situation. It's as I mentioned earlier during the presentation, people of my generation did not want to study Russian because of political reasons and the sort of the backlash after '89. And so there we are experiencing a similar moment exactly right now. What I feel actually is exactly this is the moment to acquire these kind of language skills. During the Cold War, the U.S. had excellent Sovietologists, many of whom retired after '91, and I think part of the weakness of U.S. foreign policy toward Russia has been the lack of experts, in fact, in the field. Obviously, the foreign policy, perspective shifted to China and Southeast Asia and various other places. But generally, the sort of the disappearance of those experts from the foreign policy field has been key. Now, I mean, the moment we're experiencing, because I'm reading on Twitter, sort of the backlash against the Russian language, which on the one hand, emotionally, it's normal. I think during the Second World War, there was a similar thing against German too. Although we have to remember that people like Hannah Arendt and Thomas Mann, continued to write in German in emigration. But I feel that right now it's important to know that language, to find out more about that country. I think there is a greater benefit of learning, of reading Dostoevsky to understand Putin's mind than to learn, to reading most foreign policy papers. And the other thing, the final thing about Russian is very, very interesting to me, because we speak in English, and we're from various countries. It's sort of become a colonial language itself. And oftentimes we think, but English itself has also outgrown that. I think the important thing about English is that there are Englishes, that, the Anglophone world, a lot of former colonial subjects have managed to take English and sort of recreate it in their own way. There is this great thing when in The Tempest, in Shakespeare's The Tempest, when Caliban talks to Prospero, who taught him language, and he said, "You taught me language, and my benefit is now I know how to curse." And I think in a certain way, there is, you could say, learning Russian sometimes is like appropriating Russian for your own needs, that it's not a colonizing experience, but you can also colonize the language itself. And I think a lot of Ukrainian writers who are Russian speakers can also do that as well. They can claim the language for their own, apart from or in contrast to Russian as well. So I think languages are these beings, almost like living beings, that are very interesting, and they transform and metamorphose in various ways. But yes, I do think that the skill sets in the REEES programs are more important than at any other point in the last, maybe 50 years.
If I may add a couple of things. So this is a great question. And it's really interesting what is going to happen, for example, with the field of Slavic studies. The field which there are a couple of institutions in the United States and Canada where you can find programs where you can work on degrees in Ukrainian history or literature or language. And it is interesting to observe if the situation changes and if more colleges and universities are going to offer any courses in Ukrainian, be it history, art, literature, anything, because this is a key moment when I guess the US is trying to understand Eastern Europe, trying to understand Ukraine once again, and it has been happening for quite a while already, and we all have been observing how for the past 6 weeks all key news media outlets are trying to and publishing all sorts of articles about Ukraine and trying to understand the region, the country, and what's happening over there. And a quick comment in regard to what Dimitar mentioned is that, yes, it is also interesting to pay attention to those Ukrainian Russophone writers who coexist very well with those Ukrainian writers who write in Ukrainian. And for example, one of two of such authors whose books were just published in English, were reviewed in the New York Times. So Andrei Kurkov and Evgenia Belorusets. So these are works produced in Russian, but by Ukrainian authors.
Thank you for those responses. We have a question from Patrick. Patrick, do you want to go?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question to Emma. I'm also a Holy Cross student, history major, and I'm not a REEES major, so I'm actually a French minor. So the Russian language is like not something I'm too familiar with. But I had a presentation earlier on the Wagner Group and Russian geopolitics in that manner. But I'm also wondering, like, I'm from DC. I don't have my parents were all public sector employees, school teachers, military. So I don't know like anything about the private sector. I was wondering, like, how did you first learn about these business ways to communicate? And what would your like first step? I'm about to graduate in like 2 months. What would your first step to be like for someone like me to familiarize myself with more of the private sector way of business?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I love seeing a fellow crusader. There's not that many of us. So it's great to see different Holy Cross students and connect with them. To be honest, when I was a senior in college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I explored so many different paths. I took the LSATs. I was like thinking about applying to law school. At one point, I wanted to go to medical school. And I was like always very adamant that I didn't want to do anything related to business because I hate math, which is very funny because that's my, primary tool that I use frequently in my primary role. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to have some kind of impact on the world. And I wanted to be in an environment that was really exciting, engaging, fast moving. And so my parents were, when I was, approaching my senior year, they were just letting me know that I had options in case I didn't end up wanting to go to law school. It's obviously a huge commitment just in terms of time and money. So they did encourage me to think about other paths. They said that, with a liberal arts career, you can do so many different things. And so I began to just look at a bunch of different career options. I applied to every single role that was on the careers page on the Holy Cross job board. And I applied to so many different types of roles, and mostly to, just learn about different areas outside of history, outside of law, and think about different potential career choices. So I highly recommend not applying to like 80 jobs, which is what I did, and was a huge time and resource commitment during my senior year, but to just attend all the different job fairs, go to different presentations that companies are giving on campus. And I think that's really the best way to learn about all the different roles that you can do when you graduate from college. I certainly didn't expect to end up in a role like the one I've been in for the past 4 years, but I wouldn't have found it if I hadn't, made the connection with an alumni. I think that's one of the strongest things that you can do, particularly the Holy Cross Alumni Network is really, really strong. One of our actual, she's our co-chief investment officer, is a Holy Cross alum. She sits on the investment committee at Holy Cross as well. She's on the board of trustees. And so I was able to connect with her and someone else who was an alumni that's still at the firm as well, and just learn more about, the company, the role, whether it would be a good match for me in terms of interest and skill set. And from there, I was able to find a career that I really love. So it's a lot of trial and error, and a lot of people don't find the exact role or industry, with the first job that they have out of college. But, it's just really important to explore lots of different options, really think about what your first step out of college is going to be, and go from there.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Thanks, Emma. Are there any other questions from students? I'm going to bask in the pause for a few seconds before I throw in my own. Okay, well, I'm going to actually just jump off of Patrick's question and pose it to the rest of the panel. So, in your senior year then, what if you could just take us back as a senior year REEES graduate, what were you thinking? What were your options? And what did you use to guide you to making your next step? And what do you think some of the students who are in this Zoom room today should know? Or what do you wish you had known at the time?
Well, my senior year, I already knew I wanted to go to law school, so I took the LSAT and I applied for it. But had I not gone to Slovakia for that year and Russia for the year, I don't think I would have wanted to go to law school, because it's originally what I thought I wanted to be, an immigration attorney. After going to Slovakia and seeing how hardworking, how smart, and how entrepreneurial a lot of people were there, but they just didn't have the opportunities. I was like, if these people wanted to come to America, they should be able to do so. I was like, I want to go into immigration. And I think the way of doing that is through law school. So during law school, I interned at Project Citizenship in downtown Boston, which is where they help legal permanent residents obtain U.S. citizenship. I interned at the Immigrant Council of Ireland in Dublin for a summer, and learned European immigration there. Obviously, a lot of it's country by country, but there also are EU implications as well. And then I wanted to do that professionally as well, but then I had a lot of student loans. So I just realized I couldn't pay my loans on immigration attorney salary. So I tried to see what else I could do that had international, reach, and where I could use the skills. And I found the current role I'm in, and I still do pro bono immigration stuff, but I have to pay my loans back. So I had to go more over the business side. And I think maybe later in life, maybe I would do more of the immigration law work. But right now I just do that as pro bono work. And it's been successful so far. So I don't know if I really answered that question directly, but that's kind of where I was my senior year and how I got to where I am now.
Ostap or Dimitar, do you want to take us back to your senior year?
I'll quickly, my senior year, that was a long time ago. I was writing my thesis on literary influence in the poetry of W.H. Auden and Josip Brodsky. And so you'd meet me around campus muttering to myself poems by Auden and Brodsky. That's basically my senior year. You know, it's like присловие грядущие из русского языка выбегают мыши и се равят, отгрызают от лакомого куска памяти, что твой сыр дырявый, так далее. You know, it was it's interesting, you know, to think about the word future in the Russian language and how it's all like you know, the mice are eating and you know, it's all like, you know, full of holes and everything. It's pretty interesting stuff. So anyhow, you know, that's sort of a little memory I had of my senior year. I didn't know, you know, as I said, I had no idea I was going to do journalism. I wanted to I had no idea what I was going to do at all. I just wanted to, you know, sort of live in the moment and you know, read literature, and that's why I ended up going to my MA/PhD program, because I just wanted to read more books, and that was the way to do it. Didn't even think about an academic career at the time. It was something that, you know, I was just interested in. So on the spur of the moment, I did it, and I think that's important too. I think that's important for, you know, because right now, what should I say to students? You know, it's so difficult to know what our professions would mean, even in like 5 or 10 years. What academia means, what journalism. I mean, they're all transforming very quickly, and you know, we grew up in. I mean, I grew up in a time when there was still a kind of safety. You know, things were changing, but at least there was something. You know, the concept of what journalism is, what academia is. These things are changing. It's all in flux right now. It's very difficult. I think it's much more difficult for students right now to understand. I mean, to kind of find their way around. And so I'm not sure if there is a reason for much planning. You know, we live in a topsy-turvy world, and I think the important thing is for people to, you know, maybe do what they feel like doing. You know, what they are sort of instincts tell them that they want to do, rather than plan for the future, for a long time in the future. Because we, as with COVID, as with this war, we understand that, you know, it's hard to plan the future for sure.
Maybe really briefly, so my senior year was elsewhere, abroad, so I don't know if it's that applicable for students who are in our Zoom room, but I think it's always if I were a senior now, I would probably want to go abroad for a year and travel, explore the region, get some first-hand experience, because one thing is the knowledge you get in your classrooms. The other is when you interact with those who are actually from that part of the world. So, so this is probably one of the ideas I have about this.
Thanks so much, everyone. I think we got a nice spectrum of responses to how to respond to being in your senior year. Are there any more questions for the panel? If not, I think we've had a pretty good run. And I know it's been a long day for everyone. So having a little 15-minute break in between panels would be a welcome respite. But giving Ian?
Yes, I'll just say then, please come back at 2:30 when we're going to hear more from Dmitry Kananov, who is joining Yale virtually for a couple of days as a Poynter Fellow in journalism, and we'll speak more about current considerations when viewing the media, when navigating the media professionally, but also consuming the media in and from Eastern Europe and Russia. But also to pick up on a couple of the points from our other panelists, we have another panel tomorrow on careers that focuses on getting there, both professionally and geographically. So just the type of experiences that Ostap was fantasizing about or telling us about, being able to spend time abroad, as a student, but also right after BA program, right after a master's. We have another set of 4 panelists to speak about their experiences of the last 30 years doing work abroad and how that led to their careers today. People, again, like we have today, at various ends of their careers. But thank you all 4 of you. Thank you to Josh for this wonderful, wonderful panel.
And thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I just also wanted to say that, of course, if anyone wants to connect directly, I'm happy to share my email in the chat. I'm always happy to talk to Russian and Eastern European students about different career paths.
I second that.
Thank you, and I second that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll collect those emails so that we have
Great, thank you so much, Josh.
them.
So then are we all set to drop off, or
Yeah,
do you want to
yeah,
talk
I think so. Right, Ian? It's not really my panel.
Okay.
That was great. That was fascinating. Thank you all so much for those. I mean, I feel like you're very representative of very different paths, all converging on really core issues. So it was fascinating.
Yeah, well, thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you all. It was a pleasure.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.